I am delighted to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Yvonne Kellar-Guenther from the Center for Public Health Innovation at CI International, which is located in Denver, Colorado. Yvonne received her doctorate in interpersonal communication and has been working as a program evaluator in public health for over 20 years. She's trained a variety of teams on continuous quality improvement, or CQI, as you'll hear it referred to in today's presentation, for over 10 years, and has led 3 national and many statewide CQI projects. And now she's up on the screen. Some of you might recognize her or be familiar with her through her work with the National Coordinating Center for the Regional Genetics Network. So Yvonne was an IMAX CQI coach for the last several years and helped us design and implement our regional CQI projects. So welcome, Yvonne. We're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, it says I can't share my screen. Oh, there we go.
Should be able to now, Yvonne.
Okay. There we go. All right. And I'm assuming you guys can see my slides.
Yes, that looks good.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk to you this afternoon. We're going to kind of finish up an exciting couple days with making small steps to improving systems, which is, as Melissa referred to it, the continuous quality improvement. I have a poll everywhere that I'm going to use. And so I'd appreciate if you guys could actually load up the poll everywhere so that you can answer some questions. I'm also going to have some questions that I'm just going to kind of open, and we'll do chat or people can chime in. So you can text, you text to the number 22333 and do the NCCAIGCC685. Or since you're on a computer, you can go to the pollev, pollev.com /NCCAIGCC685. And I believe that's going to be in the chat, so you'll have that. I have no conflicts to report, but I will put out there for the poor interpreters that I talk fast, and I'm going to work very hard not to talk too fast. So, so my goals for today is that I would like us to, I'm going to share with you some tips for a successful continuous quality improvement project. There was a really interesting article out recently that did a meta-analysis of continuous quality improvement projects in healthcare. And I'm going to share with you what they found were that led to the most successful CQI projects. We're going to discuss the SMART, which my guess is some of you are very familiar with. The specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound, but we'll talk through that to kind of help guide and figure out the size of your project and how you know if things are working. And I'm going to focus a lot on the M part, on the measure, because I think in general, I find people are pretty good planners, but the measure part is a little bit, it stumps people. And without the measure, you can't get through a continuous quality improvement cycle. So really quickly in the chat, if you just want to tell me how you use continuous quality improvement, like, and it could be not at all,
Oreo.
It could be in your clinic, it could be in your personal life, you know, working with volunteers. So just really quickly, give me some sense of how you use your continuous quality improvement. And Melissa, I'll tell you that I see no chat, so if they're coming in.
Okay, I will read them. Improving newborn screening turnaround times, responding to surveys, required hospital metrics, attempts to help streamline workflow, improving access to genetic services.
That's helpful. So you guys have some familiarity with it. You're using it in your work, and what I like is I'm hearing a lot of processes, which I think is great. So we're gonna start with our first poll question as we think about continuous quality improvement. And so it should be on your phone. You should be able to see and press A, B, C, or D. But the question is, which of the following is a topic that can be tested by the continuous quality improvement process? So is it A, determine if the training led to knowledge gained, B, creating a lesson plan, C, what is the most effective way to provide educational resources to providers, or D, identify who is showing up in a training. All right, I see movement still, so. So A had a strong start, but C is really trying to make it come back. All right, so it looks like it has stopped. So the correct answer actually is C. What is the most effective way to provide education resources to providers? And the reason is because that focuses on a process versus the others. You can actually determine if you led to knowledge gain with a pre-post test, right? Creating a lesson plan, you can get feedback, but you'd have to, that's a one-time thing usually. And then identifying who showed up to the training, you can get by gathering data one time. It's not an ongoing. So continuous quality improvement really is best when what you're working on is a process. So here, right, we all have the Goldilocks thing where we all want the perfect bowl, right, of oatmeal or porridge. If you make it a lot, you can actually work on making it the way that you want it. So you don't have to sample 3. You don't have to go to the bear's house and sample 3. You can actually create a process, a standardized process, so where you get it the right temperature each time. And so you can play with the time. You can use a thermometer, right? There are things you can do in the process. And so that testing, that continuous quality improvement is how to get there. It's not that the first bowl that you get will be the right bowl, but that you'll have several bowls and you'll start to figure out the right way. And then after that, you're going to be able to get there because you're going to be able to do this process each time and get to where you need to go. So I said that one of the things that I found recently was this great meta-analysis on what makes for an effective CQI process. And I want you to think, since you guys have experience, think about your own experience with CQI and think through what you think made that process most effective. So just take a moment and be like, the one that went really well, what was it that you think that kind of led to the CQI process being most effective? And then we'll do our next poll. Is it using using a fishbone diagram, which is one method for kind of like planning things out, right? Is it having weekly meetings with all the integral partners? Is it having a sound plan that leads to a PDSA cycle? Is it having food at gatherings? So what's the thing that you think the researchers found led to the most effective CQI? Love seeing the movement. Thank you guys for being really invested in this. So looks like the winner is having weekly meetings with integral partners, and that actually is right. So that shocked me, but they looked at a bunch of different continuous quality improvement projects in healthcare settings, and the difference between those that worked and those that didn't, the only significant difference was having meetings. And you had to have the meetings in specific ways, but the meetings matter. And so I think when we do continuous quality improvement, we sometimes skip the meetings or we give it to one person to kind of take it and run with it. And you really can't do that. For this to be effective, you need to have these meetings, and the meetings need to be weekly, or at least weekly. So they can be less than weekly, but they shouldn't go longer than weekly. So you have to meet often. They need to be led by those who are an integral part of the team. So you don't really want an outside facilitator. You want the team talking about it and focusing on what's being done. And you want the meetings to be focused on the implementation of the initiatives through the cooperation of every group that's impacted. And I think that's the other thing to think about for continuous quality improvement is when you make a change, other people are impacted. And so the reasons that you need, my next question is, why do you think meetings matter? So I'm not going to answer my own question, but just now in the chat, I'll have Melissa read off a few, or you can unmute, but why do you think the meetings matter? Why was it such a big deal?
So communication and ownership, updates, yep, accountability, constant communication. People need to feel included. People
Great.
are invested in the outcome.
Yeah, right. You guys have this. When you make a change, it impacts other people. And we don't want something to happen to us. We want something to happen with us. And so when you have the meetings, and even if my group maybe is barely involved, it could impact me and you might not know. So having me there at the meeting would be really helpful. These meetings are planning meetings, so I get to talk about like what we're going to measure. I get to weigh in on what we're going to measure. I get to weigh in on how it's going to go. And I get to weigh in on your plan, do, study, act cycle. I get to weigh in on, do we continue or do we stop? Right. So I'm part of the process. People hate change. And we really hate change when we're told to change and not when we get to be part of the change. And so having the meetings gets people at the table, and you get to hear what they're seeing, you get to, and what they're thinking, you get to hear their concerns, and you get to hear their ideas. So I only have a couple things I need you to take away from this. And one is that when you do a CQI cycle, you have at least weekly meetings, and those meetings involve people that are every part of the process, right? So they have all the different pieces so that they can be there and they can be part of it. The other thing I would like to convince you of is that you want to start with small change. So usually when I meet with people, they want to, their problem that they're trying to solve is world peace. And we don't want to solve world peace. We want something that's a little more manageable. And so one of the things that I want you guys to think about is kind of problems that you want to solve. I'm going to ask in a little bit for you to think through what mentally you might walk through as I walk through my example. But it needs to be small. So if you want to work on education of providers, there's a piece of that you want to start with. You don't want to start with the whole thing. There's, right, is it creating the materials? Is it creating your elevator pitch? Is it, finding out who the providers are? Like, so they're what part of the process? So you want to start with the small part. And when you start small, you want to start with educating a provider or a set of providers, seeing how it goes. Then you do a few more providers, see how it goes. And the reason for that is when we start big, we might be executing an idea that doesn't really work, right? And so now we've burned some bridges. So have you ever been part of a project where the company rolled out a new mission, or they rolled out, hey, now we're going to start doing X. And it was this big change, right? And then you're just kind of stuck in it. And then, a month or two later, they're like, that didn't work. Now we're going to do this. And if you do that enough, people stop caring. I've interviewed a lot of people at big agencies that are like, well, I just kind of lay low when a new mission comes out because I know in 6 months it's going to change. You want to start small so that you don't burn your resources. You get buy-in, and then if it's working, you can make it bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's sustainable. So continuous quality improvement leads us to sustainable change versus kind of quick change. So have meetings, really think through small. On a small step, but a small group that you test it on. My tip number 2 is when you have the meetings, your meeting agenda should be structured as questions that need to be addressed. A lot of times people will go to meetings, but they don't know what the meeting's about. They don't know what they're going to do in the meeting. And if you have the questions, the group has a sense of what has to be answered. And if the meeting ends and not all the questions are answered, then you know that what the next meeting is going to work on. So you know as a group when you've finished your work, if you have your agenda structured as questions that need to be addressed. I would like you all to put your goal at the top of your meeting because we have really awesome ideas that get really exciting and we get mission drift, right? So we go in saying, hey, we're going to really work on educating providers. We're going to work on our elevator pitch. And we leave the meeting and we're having a banquet for providers where we give them all handouts and flowers. We drifted, right? So we need to make sure that we kind of go back to what we say we're going to do. And then during the meeting, someone needs to be writing down the action steps and who's going to do it. So not just the step, but who's going to do it. Because we've all been on a project where you're like, phew, I wasn't mentioned, so I don't have to do it. So the what and the who, and by when. And then you send out to the group, here's what we've agreed to, who's going to do it, and by when. So those are some of my tips to outside of the normal SMART PDSA cycle and things that we typically hear with continuous quality improvement. So I want to start with doing some quality improvement. So I'd like you to think about a problem that you would like to tackle, just kind of mentally. Ideally, we would be in a room and you could get into groups and we'd have hours, but we don't. So is there something happening right now that you wish wasn't happening, or something that's not happening that you want to happen? And kind of think through, like, you know, what do you want to see that you're not seeing, or what are you not seeing that you want to see? Take a moment and kind of write down some idea of something you'd like to do. And it could be you want to change, well, you should want to change a process, but it could be, right, people are acting in ways that you don't want them to be acting in, or vice versa. It could be that, you know, equipment's not working the way that it needs to be working. What is it that we need? Okay, so I'm going to give you the problem that we're all going to help me address, that a lot of us might have as a result of COVID, based on the research. I'm not alone here. But I now weigh more than I did a year ago because I get to sit at home and I've had the stress of COVID, right? So a common problem that they're reporting is a lot of us gained weight during COVID. So that's a problem that I see happening. So, I can talk about specific symptoms, right? So I can talk about that my scale is telling me that I weigh more than I weighed a year ago. And I can tell you that my clothes are telling me that I weighed more than I weighed a year ago, right? Especially my pants. So I should collect data. What proof do I have that the problem exists? And so I've just given you some proof, right? I've given you that my scale and my clothes are telling me that I've gained weight. It's possible, though, that my clothes have shrunk in the washer and that I haven't gained weight. It's possible that my scale is off, right? So think about, like, what data we would need to collect to see if my problem exists. And so look at your problem. How do you know this is a problem? So is it a hunch? Are you know, how do you know that this is something that should be happening that isn't? How do you know it isn't happening, right? So kind of take a moment and think through your own problem, and then we'll think through my problem. So what would count as proof that my problem exists? So I gave 2 examples, but what data could I collect? So if you have ideas for what data I could collect to see if I weigh more than I should, or if I weigh more than I did a year ago, like in the chat, kind of write down some ideas of what kind of data. Or unmute.
We got one. Medical records review of past reported weight. There we go.
So my memory could be off.
You're right. You could count how many calories you've been consuming.
Yes, so I could get... Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No,
check trends on exercise app.
So yeah, so I can get data from a reliable source, maybe more reliable than my memory, like the physician, to kind of look at my records and hope I went in a year ago. I can, I'm already forgetting some of them. I can, people have given me examples of what I can do to fix it, it sounds like. But so I can look at different other data than what I have. I went on to, I looked at research to find out what my ideal weight should be, right? So I might think that maybe I gained 10 pounds and I needed to gain 10 pounds. right? So I went on and looked at a website and put in my information, and it gives me different models for my ideal weight. And so now I can look at my scale and see if my scale is telling me how close I am or am not to the ideal weight. So part of what we need to do is we need to have a sense as to where we're going. So I need to know if it's a problem, right? So I've got my problem of my clothes and my scale. I have proof that my problem exists, but I also need that proof is not just in what my scale says, but in what the research says the ideal weight should be. And so for your problem that you've written down, where could you go? Just kind of brainstorm where you think you could go to figure out what you should be aiming for. What should it look like? And maybe it's other states in the region. Maybe it's other coworkers. Maybe there's a genetics counselor Facebook page and you can ask people there, right? Maybe there's Family Voices has a page, or they're the experts and you want to help getting families involved. So you go and ask them what that involvement should look like. So think about where you can go to get a sense of what that goal is that you should be doing, right? And then we have to start the process of like mapping out what we are doing. So we have a sense as to where we should be going from the data, that the research that already is out there, but now I need to see what I'm already doing. So I weigh 10 pounds more than desired. What should I be mapping? What do you guys think my map would look like? So again, just a few of you could give me some idea.
Well, Natasha's got a great idea about how to fix your problem. About
Awesome.
Starting to do walk and talk meetings, breakout hikes.
This is good. So I need her on my team. She needs to help me with my plan.
Some other things were count calories, food intake, or calorie, exercise, counting steps.
Right. So I could map out my steps, which is kind of the data piece. I could map out my calories, but I'm going to start more basic than that. I've got to map out my process and my system. I have to map out my day. Where are my weak points, right? So I wake up in the morning, I take a walk with my husband, and then I come home and walk my dog. And then I do a workout. And then I eat breakfast. So my day starts pretty well. Like I think I kill it at the morning. I've got my exercise, I've got food. And then I go to my job where I stand or sit for 8 to 10 hours. And now that I'm working from home, my commute is non-existent. And I have to walk up a flight of stairs. At around 10 o'clock, I usually have a piece of fruit, right? Around 12, I usually eat lunch. If I'm lucky and I don't have meetings, I can take an afternoon walk. It doesn't always happen. Around 4 o'clock, I get hungry again. And so I eat a snack, then I make and eat dinner. Then I walk my dog again, and then I sit down, watch TV for 1 to 2 hours. I eat dessert to celebrate the fact that I got through my day, and then I go to sleep. So looking at my map, where might my sticking points be? Where am I having a hard time?
It doesn't seem like you made a point of determining what your ideal weight is. Better yet, your desired weight. You haven't put a number there.
Okay. So I'm going to go with the research. So I'm going to go back here for a minute. I'm going to go with the research and say that my ideal weight, I'm going to make it 130 pounds, because based on this data, right, there's a couple different places. And so 130 shows up a lot. So that would be my theory. So, and I weigh more than 130 pounds. So based on my problem that I keep saying, let's assume that I weigh 140, right? So given my 140, I still have, oh, I'm going the wrong direction. I'm taking you guys way back. Why might what's going on in my day that might make me weigh more than I want to weigh? So before we get to the sticking points, let's talk about my whys, right? So I weigh more than 10 pounds. I've shown you my day, right? I probably weigh more because I'm consuming too many calories, is what the research would tell me, and I'm not moving enough in the day, because I know that those are the two things that contribute to weight loss. Why am I consuming too many calories, or why don't I move much? Oops. Well, I'm consuming too many calories because I'm probably eating too many snacks at night, right? So I said that I ate at night. So I'm assuming that my theory is that maybe I shouldn't be eating so much at night. I'm not moving much because I have a desk job. And when I'm done working, I'm pretty tired and I don't want to go do anything, right? So why am I eating too many snacks at night? Well, as I said, I like to reward myself for a busy day. And then I'm watching TV, and it's easy to kind of eat while I'm watching TV. Okay, so now, given my process, where do you think my sticking points are? Or where do you think I think they are? And I love whoever unmuted. So you can unmute and talk to me, or you can chat with Melissa.
I'm going to go with too
He's
many
not helping.
snacks. And yeah.
So too many snacks?
Mm-hmm.
And is that what the other person said?
I would say your evening, remaining inactive in the evening. I do the same thing.
So I'm inactive in the evening and I'm consuming calories that I'm not burning till the next day, so they have a chance, right? So that's one theory. So I have two potential root causes here. One is the eating in the evening, which I agree with, and one is not moving during the day, right? I'm going to come up with a small measure of change to test and identify, or to address my problem. So I'm not going to focus on both. I can try to move more during the day and change my eating at night, but then I won't really know what works. And if I'm unhappy, I don't know what I can give up. So I'm going to do one thing at a time, like a good scientist, and I'm going to see how that impacts where I want to go. And let's be honest, I'm going to start with the one that I think is the easiest, because I would like to, keep my routine as close to normal as possible. So I need to pick out something that will help me know that I'm moving towards my goal. So someone earlier said, hey, you don't know what your goal is. So I know what my goal is. I'm moving towards 130 pounds, right? Dropping 10 pounds. I know time period, which I haven't said, but I'm not doing that in a week. I'm not doing that in 2 weeks. Hopefully I'm not even doing it in a month, right? This is something that should take me a few months to get there. So I just told you about a small test of change, but it's going to take me a few months to know if this is working, right? But I'll have a sense if it's working if I start dropping weight and can stay dropping weight. So I don't have to wait the entire 2 months to know if what I'm going to try is going to work or not. And then how will I know if I meet the goal? Well, so I've got a sense of where I need to be in a few months, but let me make some interim, right? So let's say after 2 weeks, I've lost 2 pounds. Let's say after, another 2 weeks, I've lost another 2 pounds. So in a month, I've lost 4 pounds. So I'm starting to have small goals that I can kind of think through, right? I'm creating a plan. So I have to know where I'm going to know if it worked, right? So the plan, do, study, act cycle, there's no point in having a plan, doing it, looking at the data if I don't know where I'm going. So that was a really good point that someone brought up earlier. I need to try to predict that I need to change something. So I'm going to say that what I'm going to change is I'm going to move more, right? Because that's easier to me than giving up my reward in the evening. So I'm going to move more. So that's my plan. My prediction is that I can squeeze in a little more either early in the morning or at night. I just make that dog walk longer, right? I'm going to do my plan. I'm going to, for a couple weeks, track how much I'm moving, right? I'm going to analyze my data to see if I'm moving more. So I have to have a baseline. I have to know where I'm starting. And then I'm going to see if that's moving me towards my weight loss goal. So my plan is something that you guys have probably heard, the SMART goal that drives SMART objectives, right? My plan, I need to know who's doing what, when, to what extent, right? I'm going to have a small test of change. I'm just changing how much I move during the day. I'm not going to change a bunch of things. I'm not going to run a marathon, right? I'm going to add some steps on. For my study, this is the other thing I want you to take out of this talk. You really want 10 observations within a few weeks if possible. So you know you've hit the right size project where within a month, you can tell if you've got enough data to actually test it and see. And then after that, I'm going to decide, am I going to continue to do this? Am I going to adapt it? Maybe do more steps? Maybe the steps aren't working. I need to move to abandon it and move to changing my diet. So this is how it all kind of comes together, right? Again, PDSA cycles should be done quickly, no more than a month or two. So I meet with some projects and they say, hey, every month we're going to see how we're doing on X. Well, that takes me 10 months to know if it's working. I want to know if it's working within 2 months. And so the right size project is one where in a few months, you're like, we're moving in a direction. Maybe we didn't meet our goal, but we're moving in the right direction. So we'll start with a little PDSA cycle, a very small scale test. I'm going to make a change of maybe 1,000 or 2,000 steps a day more, right? I'm going to see how that works. And then maybe I make a little more and I get it bigger and I get it bigger. And eventually I have a bigger test of change. For yours, where you guys are talking about processes in your clinics or your labs or with your groups, you start with a person or two, and then you move to 5 people, 10 people, the full clinic, another clinic. So your PDSA cycles, what gets bigger is the number of people that are doing the change. So I'm going to create a plan. So we talked about why does the problem exist? And so I'm thinking I actually really like the one on the bottom, that I'm not moving a lot during the day because that feels easier to me. So I need to check my assumptions about my root cause, right? So I have a Fitbit. So here's some data from my Fitbit, and it tells you how much I've moved over a 6-week period. What's missing? So we can see how much I've moved. But as someone said earlier,
weight loss.
So the weight loss, I'm going to have to measure the weight loss, absolutely. But my test of change is around the movement. So I'm going to see if I move more, and then every week I'll weigh myself. So absolutely. But I also need a goal, right? So I can move all I want, but if I don't have a goal, I don't know if I'm meeting, right? So I'm going to go with the recommended 10,000 steps a day. So given my 10,000 steps a day as my goal, am I moving enough? So again, you can put in the chat or someone can just unmute, but how am I doing? Melissa's giving me the...
I think pretty good overall. Most of the dots are above the goal.
Yeah, it's not horrible, but I'm not meeting it every day. So I could definitely try the 10,000 steps. My favorite thing in the data are these data points here. Does anyone have any idea what these data points are on the days where I just move a ton?
Weekends.
Yep, that's right, weekends. Good job. So when you look at your data, you have to think about things. We get really drawn to these big events. And so I need to think, well, I don't need to change what I'm doing on the weekend. I need to change what I'm doing on the weekday. So my goal is to have more steps on a weekday, right? Because that's where I'm really having a hard time. And I do okay in the morning. So now my goal, more specific, my goal is to try to move more maybe afternoon, right? And so I want to hit my 10,000 steps a day, but I might change how I do things in the afternoon. So one question is, do I have the correct root cause? And, we won't know until I test it, but it could be that the calories are the way to go, which is what a lot of the research would suggest. So I might need to cut out that nightly reward, but I'm going to try my walking first and see how I get there. So we've defined the problem. We have proof that the problem exists, right? So I've got my weight. I've got what the research recommends. I've got possible causal factors. I know that it could be the eating or it could be the movement, right? Now I need to think about what's within my sphere of influence. So the other thing that I see a lot with people is they come up with, okay, you know what needs to happen is Melissa needs to stop giving me cookies. That's my problem, right? I can't change Melissa's behavior. I can only change my behavior. And so when you write out your PDSA cycle, when you write out what you're going to do, your plan, the first thing your team should stop and do and say is everything in here stuff that we do, or are we trying to tell others what to do, right? So if your thing is, hey, I want primary care providers to make sure that patients come in and get genetic testing, you can't change what they do. What can you do either to help them do it, or what can you do to get people in? So try to start internal. What is within your sphere of influence, right? So help me, again, unmute, which I love, or in the chat, what's outside of my control or what's inside of my control? Like, what do I have control over for my problem?
How often you walk?
Yeah, so I have a lot of control over how often I walk, right? And I walk with my husband in the morning, and I walk with my dog, but I could walk by myself, and that's okay, right? What's outside?
Weather.
The weather. Yeah. So it turns out I live in Colorado. We had snow just a week ago. We've had a lot of rain this week. That's outside of my control. Whether I put on rain pants and walk in the rain is inside of my control, but the weather is outside of my control. Absolutely. So I want you guys, when you make your plans, to think about those two questions: what's within our sphere of influence and what's outside of it. All right, so we're gonna try to move towards meeting our goals. So I'm gonna do the walking, right? How will I know if I've met my goal? So I've got two things, right? So I'm gonna try to walk more. I'm trying to hit 10,000 steps a day. So that's a daily measure. But as someone pointed out, I can't lose sight of my big goal, which is to lose weight. So if I walk a lot and I hit my 10,000 steps every day, but I'm not losing weight, then I got to try something else, right? So we have to create our goal. And this is the SMART that you guys are familiar with, but I've phrased it slightly differently. So, because I think it helps to think about it. I love the concept of measurable, attainable, relevant, but what does that really mean, right? So the first thing you have to do when you look at your goal statement, or you look at your objectives, is can you tell who is doing what, to what extent, when? So for my goal, I am walking to what extent? 10,000 steps a day, 10,000 steps, and then the when is every day, right? So I will know that I have not met my goal if I do not walk 10,000 steps every day. So I hit all of those pieces. So then we have to say, okay, how feasible is my goal? So can I do this goal with the time and the resources that I have? So what's going to get in the way of my goal? What's my biggest risk to not making those 10,000 steps a day? You can unmute or chat.
Working too long.
Yeah, working. Getting stuff done, working, sitting at my desk, and being like, I'll just do this before I go, I'll do this before I go, right? So my goal may not be feasible. It might be that I can't get 10,000 steps and I have to do 8. It might be that I can't get 10,000 steps and I need to focus on food instead, right? So I have to decide how feasible my goal is given my constraints. So my constraint is time, but some of your constraints are people, right? So if your goal is to educate primary care providers to do genetic testing, and you have one genetic counselor and they've already got that whole full-time job, how are they going to also work in educating primary care providers? I worked with one of the NIMAC projects. We were looking at why people are missing appointments. Well, the people who are in the clinic didn't have time to look at why people were missing appointments. They couldn't call them, but they found a resource, which was a student who could look at it. And so maybe if the goal is feasible, if you can get an extra resources for a short period of time. And then you have to always go back to, is this getting us where we need to be? do I really think that walking could help me lose weight? And the research says that yes, that's not a bad goal to have, right? So our SMART, right, our specific, our measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. So I've color-coded it. So the specific is who is doing what. And this is when you have to write a grant and use a SMART goal. So who is doing what is your specific. Your measurable is to what extent. Your time, the when is the time bound, right? When do you start? When do you stop? How often? The relevant, which I think is the one that's the most unclear, is does this get us to where we need to be? So when you come up with your plan, is it really going to get us where we need to be? So Melissa not bringing me cookies probably won't get me where I need to be. It needs to really be me walking. And can we do it in the time with the resources that we have? That's the attainable. So this slide is to just kind of break the SMART down into words that most of us use every day instead of attainable and relevant. And then this, how it all fits together is, you might have seen, right, our big questions, what can we do to move towards the goal, right? Well, so what we can do, that's the specific part. The relevant is making sure we're moving towards the goal. The achievable, that's answering what we can try to move towards our goal. How we know if we met the goal, that's the measurable piece. Not so the measurable of what are we doing, the actions that we're trying, and are we getting the outcome that we want. So we have two pieces of data there. And then what change can we make, which is the plan and PDSA. So we're gonna, I've kind of already written a goal, but what else could I try? Let's write a goal for me around food that is specific, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So if I'm not gonna walk, what's something else that I can try?
Cut back on your caloric intake. Yeah,
so I can cut back on my caloric intake. And so the specific, what am I doing? I'm counting calories and making sure that it's less than it was before. So again, I have to have a baseline before I start this, right? It's relevant because we know that cutting back calories leads towards my weight loss goal. We'll see whether it's attainable or not, but let's assume that I can do this and be okay. And then when do I start? Do I start today? Do I start this weekend? Right? So how long do I do this for? So we've got the who is doing what, to what extent, right? We've decided that it's feasible. What we're changing about the process is me reducing the number of calories that I take every day. So the measurable, how do I know that what I'm doing is working? Well, one, I have to have a baseline. So before you can ever do a measure, you have to know where you're at. And I will tell you that I cannot tell you how many calories I consume during a day. And we'll get to that in some of the feasibility as to why I specifically can't do that. But right, so I don't have a baseline. I need to get a baseline. What I would see or stop seeing is I would see a decrease after I get a baseline. I would see that goes down, right? And I count it because the calories, right, have values, so that's good. How will we know that what we're seeing is an improvement? Okay, so I'll have the fewer calories, but I can't lose sight of my goal. I should also be losing a pound a week, right? So every few weeks, I should see that I'm losing a few pounds. Is this something that I do daily or at least a few times a week? Turns out I eat daily. That's not a problem for me, right? So this is something I can actually do so I can get the data. So I could map my calories for 2 weeks and know whether my plan is working or not.
Okay. Yvonne?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt with a question from the
Yes.
chat?
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about the baseline in particular and how long it needs to be and why it's important?
Sure. So the baseline, in terms of how long it needs to be, it depends kind of on the change you're looking at, but I'm looking at a small change where I expect to see something in a few weeks. So your baseline could be as little as a few weeks to a few months before. So if I want to change my calorie consumption, if I map my calories for a couple of weeks, I should know. And so usually what we talk about in the CQI data is you want 4 to 5 data points before to kind of have a sense to then see if there's a change in a direction. So I don't know if that answers the how long, but again, we really want things that we're doing daily or weekly. So you shouldn't really need more than a month to kind of set your baseline. If what you're looking at takes longer to see if there's a change, it's probably a bigger CQI project, and find a piece first, and then build on that before you start building on the rest, and you'll get your baseline as you're doing that. And what was the other, did I get the other question too?
Yeah, I actually turned it into a question based on the comment. The comment was, the baseline part trips me up sometimes. If I have a good idea, should I wait to implement it in order to have a baseline?
So you can get, it's always good to have a baseline. You do need to set some time aside for it. But again, it shouldn't be more than a month to set aside time to get your baseline. And you sometimes can get it from literature, but really, how you knew your problem existed, that's your baseline for, I guess, for the outcome measure. But for the baseline for the process, yes, you would need to invest the time, take a few weeks to a month to get the baseline that you need. It will totally be worth it, because otherwise you can't tell. And right, what's going to happen is I go to set a baseline and my son has a birthday. And so I'm eating cake, so my baseline's a little off. Or I'm going to go set a baseline and we went out to dinner. The thing is that always happens. That's life. And so my baseline of 2 weeks, whether if he has a birthday or not, whether we go out to dinner or not, that's still my baseline. So these things pop up that we like to say only happen a little, but they happen often. So my favorite example is newborn screening. Whenever I work with newborn screening on timeliness, they're like, well, we had a holiday that month. We had a holiday that month. Well, do you know how many months we don't have holidays? Turns out not very many. And so that's okay. That's part of your baseline. That's part of life. And so as you track data, it's okay that you've got those things that feel like they're not very common that are more common than you expect in your baseline. So I'm just gonna just make sure that I'm on time. I'm gonna want to measure my caloric intake and see that I have a baseline, see that it's changing, but I'm also going to want to measure my weight, right? And again, I've chosen something that I do daily. So how are we capturing the data? So this is where I fall down. How you would capture caloric intake data is you would keep a food journal. I know from previous research with me, I don't do that very well. So that's why the walking works with me, because the Fitbit does the work. It already exists. I don't have to do the work. So can I change my data? Instead of it being caloric intake, can I say, you know what? I'm going to stop eating dessert at night. And can I just mark down, tonight I had dessert or tonight I didn't? Because that I can do. And so I think that's the place where people really get tripped up. It's not just the baseline. It's capturing the data in a way that doesn't have a lot of burden. And so think through that. Do I really need to know my calories? Or can I just say, look, I know that if I cut out dessert, that's a win for me. And maybe it's not. In a month, I'll know. But like, can I test that first? So what I always tell people is that if you're going to ask people to provide data for you, you should try to do it yourself. I never ask people to keep a food journal because I can't do it. I never ask people to track all their hours in a day, because it turns out it's really hard to track all your hours in a day. So if I want primary care providers to talk to patients about genetics, can they just mark down person needs genetics talks, referred, yes, no, or talk to them about it, yes, no, right? So how can you make that data to where it's easy to collect? And then you want the data recorded daily or every few days so that you can get that quick PDSA cycle. And always think, how long does it take me to get 10 data points? If it's more than a month, that's too big. We need to find a different data point. So our PDSA cycle should be done quickly. I'm going to keep saying this, no more than a month or two. All I'm going to say on this slide is this run chart exists. Someone has made it, not me. It's from IHI. I can give it to you. It's there to share. And they've made it to where you put in the values. So you put everything in the blue, you put in the value and the goal, and then it actually creates a run chart. So at the end of this presentation, and I believe you have access to the presentations, is my email address. If you want this, I will send it to you. And so this is just a tool for you to use for a run chart. I'm a bar chart girl, so I often will do a bar chart as well. So there's different ways to do data, but this is a standard run chart that they always ask you for CQI. And the little N in the orange is where the median, so it does a median up until the N, and then at the end it starts a new median, so you can start to see change. And what you're looking for is plateaus, right? I'm looking for plateaus in days where I don't eat dessert, or number of steps that I have. I'm looking, you know, for weight loss. I want to see it drop, but I want to see a steady drop. I don't want to see the whole, it's dropped, it's up, right? So I don't want the up and down. I want the sustained change. So when you look at your data, you want to look to see how it's never going to be perfectly flat, but you can see that it starts to cluster around the line in the second half here, and that's what you're looking for. And the thing, our eye is drawn to the thing that's above the goal. It's a one-time thing that may or may not actually be the sustain. You really want to look at where it's right around the line and it's been there for a bit. All right, so my last thing, because I know we're getting tight on time, is don't forget balance measures. So I'm about to, I'm about to change how I eat. That could have unintended consequences, right? So I don't know about the rest of you, but I get hangry. And so my family does not like when I say, hey, guess what? I'm going on a diet. They all run and hide. And so I have to think about how my change is going to affect other people. So, right, I'm not going to eat dessert at night, but I can't glower at my kids while they eat dessert at night, right? So I just got to kind of have a balance measure to think about that for them. I've got to think about, you know, my own attitude. What am I going to do when I get short with them? Do I like stop and check myself? So just understand that everything you do impacts another piece, and try to plan for that ahead of time. There's this process called a pre-mortem, where before an event, you kind of guess what will go wrong. That's what you need to do. So I had a friend do this for their wedding, and they were like, okay, what could go wrong that's in our sphere of influence, right? Weather, I can't control. People not knowing where to sit at reception, I can. How do I make sure that doesn't happen? What we're going to do is we're going to try to gather data to see if the unintended consequences are happening. So my examples are from newborn screening, but we have a lot of newborn screening laboratories are going from 5 days a week operating hours to 6 days a week. And they're doing that because then we can report out results quicker, which is what we're very interested in. What we've learned is staff don't always want to work that long. People don't want to work on the weekends. So all of a sudden you get staff turnover, you get lower job satisfaction. Well, staff turnover increases your birth to reporting because you don't have enough staff to run things, right? So we're going to measure birth to reporting, the outcome, to see if it changed, but we should also measure how happy staff are, so that we can, before it gets too far, we can stop and make sure that their needs are being met. So these are just some other things that have come up in newborn screening that might kind of fit with things that you're thinking of. They're going and instead of entering the data themselves, they're using electronic demographics program. That sounds great. Fewer typos, right? You get things in there correctly, but staff might feel like they're going to lose their job. So when you make a change, do staff feel threatened by that change? We like to increase knowledge. We love to increase people's knowledge. With knowledge comes actions, and you can't always control those actions. So I might increase your knowledge about newborn screening, and you may choose not to get your newborn screened, or during pregnancy, I increase your knowledge about newborn screening, and then the OBs all of a sudden are answering a bunch of questions that they can't answer, so they're very frustrated with us, right? So if we're going to have primary care providers talking about genetic testing, are they going to be answering things they can't answer? We give reports out more frequently. We're like, hey, here's how you're doing. We love data. You love data. And then people start to feel overwhelmed and they stop looking at anything that you send, right? There's that person that emails you all the time. And at the beginning, you looked at it and now you don't. It's that kind of thing. So you've got to think through those types of measures. So when your group meets, when you come up with your plan, before you hit the study phase, ask, what could happen? What potentially could happen that we need to think about? How could this change impact other people? How quickly do we think it'll show up? And how are we going to kind of capture this data? How often do we need to capture? So you don't need to ask staff every day how satisfied they are with their job, because they'll stop being satisfied pretty quickly. But maybe once a month, you need to check in. So, all right, Melissa, I have 2 questions. Do I have time for my, all right.
I think so, if we go fast.
Okay, so this is go back to poll everywhere. Just going to see what is a balance measure. So is a balance measure A measure that tracks if the burden of data collection is offset by the benefit? B, it's a measure that of whether the change worked. C, it's a measure that tracks the positive and negative processes. Or D, which I'm very proud of you guys, it's a measure that tracks potential unintended consequences. So do not forget about potential unintended consequences. And then last question, ideally, nice. How long should a PDSA cycle last? So a year, no more than a month or two, 6 months, however long you need to get 10 observations. Yep, it is no more than a month or two. So this is what I want you to remember. Do your PDSA cycles within a month or two. Try to identify a change that's within your sphere of influence. Try to get data that's fairly easy to get and minimize the burden. Don't forget about balance measures and hold your CQI teams at least weekly with the people that are involved and the people that are impacted. And that is it. Oh, and here's my contact.
Thanks.
Sorry, oh yeah, here's my contact information in case you want to get that one run chart from me. So.
And I think I dropped your email in the chat, so good thing you put it up there. I think we might have 1 or 2 minutes for questions. If you guys have any questions, I can kind of monitor the chat, or you can come off mute if you're comfortable doing that.
If nobody else has a question, Melissa and Yvonne, I think you can both sort of tell this story about how we sort of started with Yvonne brought up how we started with the idea of missed genetics appointments and the sort of really long journey we went on of root cause analysis. And then they saw the video yesterday. So almost everybody on the call will have seen the video as sort of the end product. So you can just sort of give them that little snapshot.
Yeah, so one of the clinics that we're working with, right, when you schedule people and then they don't show, you lose income, but then people just aren't coming, and that's not what you want. You're really there because you want people to get that information. And so we figured out there was a problem by looking at how many really were missing. And then we didn't have the reason why. So they got a student who called people. And we called people that made their appointment to figure out why, and people who didn't make their appointment. And as you probably can guess, the people who made the appointment were much easier to get a hold of than the people who didn't get the appointment. But we learned things. And so we learned a lot of information, even from the people who came, and that informed the video. So I don't know if that covers everything that you wanted, or Melissa, if you want to add.
Yeah, I think just taking one step back too, I think before you jumped in, as our CQI coach, we really brought it back to the region to ask what are some CQI projects that we could consider. And the missed appointments kind of bubbled to the top fairly quickly because, just as you said, that causes barriers in accessing specialists and genetic services more broadly. So we really wanted to try and think about it, and we did a couple of different small projects, and then as Alyssa said, we just created the video as a way to help attack kind of one of the 2 areas where we found could be related to missed appointments. So education was one, which thus resulted in the video. Why do I need to go to a genetics appointment in the first place? And then the second was around more logistics. So of course, the telehealth component of NIMAC's work is really important there and really helps to facilitate that access. So it's been a great learning process, I think, for the team. And now we're excited to see the final output with the video.
Right. And Robert posted something in the chat. So we talk about whether you adapt, so adopt, adapt, or abandon. And the adapt, he points out you have 2 options, right? So you can modify and retest or expand. So the adaptation could be that you stay within that smaller, you get bigger. So thank you, that's a good point.
Well, thanks. Unless there's other questions, I know I really appreciate always hearing more about CQI. I learn something every time, I feel like, no matter how many times I hear Yvonne talk to us about CQI and all the steps in the PDSA cycle. So thanks so much for sharing all your knowledge with the NIMAC team and at the annual meeting here. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to turn things over to Joanne, I think, who's going to help wrap things up this afternoon.